Imagine living in a world where your very thoughts could condemn you, where a whispered rumor, a single accusation, could shatter your life and cast a chilling shadow over your family for generations. What happens when faith becomes a weapon, and fear becomes the ultimate tool of control? Step into the chilling heart of the Spanish Inquisition. Witness its terrifying rise, its brutal methods, and the profound human cost of an institution that sought to control not just actions, but beliefs. If you're ready for a deep dive into one of history's darkest chapters, hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. The air in Spain in the late 15th century crackled with a potent mix of triumph and tension. After nearly 8 centuries, the Reconquista, the long and arduous Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, was nearing its glorious conclusion. In 1492, the very year Christopher Columbus set sail, Granada, the last Moorish stronghold, finally fell. Spain, for the first time in centuries, stood united, not just geographically, but under the singular fervent banner of Catholicism. This newfound unity, however, brought a deep-seated anxiety. For generations, Christians, Muslims, and Jews had coexisted, albeit sometimes uneasily, within the diverse kingdoms of Spain. Now, with the push for absolute religious purity, the presence of new Christians, conversos, Jews who had converted often under duress, and moriscos, Muslims who had converted, became a source of profound suspicion. Were their conversions sincere, or were they merely a facade, a cunning ploy to maintain their social standing and economic influence while secretly practicing their old faiths? This question, fueled by genuine religious zeal, societal prejudice, and political expediency, gnawed at the hearts of the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. They envisioned a unified Spain, a shining beacon of orthodox faith, and any perceived deviation threatened the very fabric of their carefully constructed kingdom. They needed a tool, a powerful instrument, to ensure not just outward conformity, but genuine internal belief. The existing episcopal inquisitions run by local bishops were simply not effective enough to root out what they believed was a vast conspiracy of heresy. And so, in 1478, with the blessing of Pope Sixtus IV, the monarchs established the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. This was not merely a religious court, it was a powerful, state-controlled institution, unique in its direct allegiance to the crown, not just the papacy. Its mandate was clear: to identify, try, and punish heretics, specifically those new Christians suspected of Judaizing, secretly practicing Judaism, or murmurings, secretly practicing Islam. The man chosen to wield this terrifying new power was Tomás de Torquemada, a Dominican friar, confessor to Queen Isabella. Torquemada was a figure of unyielding piety and unshakable conviction, utterly convinced of the righteousness of his mission. Appointed Grand Inquisitor in 1483, he rapidly expanded the Inquisition's reach, establishing tribunals across the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. He was a force of nature, driven by an absolute belief that he was saving souls and protecting the purity of the faith, even if it meant resorting to the harshest measures. Under Torquemada's iron will, the Suprema, the Supreme Council of the Inquisition, was created, overseeing a vast network of informers, prisons, and judicial processes. A chilling shadow began to fall across Spain. The Inquisition promised to purify the nation, to protect its soul from corruption. But for thousands, especially the new Christians, its establishment marked the end of an era of uneasy tolerance and the terrifying dawn of an age defined by suspicion, fear, and the ever-present threat of the pyre. The machinery of fear had been meticulously assembled, its first gears grinding into motion. Once established, the Inquisition operated with a chilling, methodical precision. It was a system designed to inspire absolute obedience, to crush dissent, not through open warfare, but through an insidious, pervasive fear. The process began not with a formal accusation, but often with the Edict of Grace or the Edict of Faith. This public proclamation, read in churches across Spain, exhorted good Catholics to come forward and denounce any acts of heresy they had witnessed, offering a period of grace for self-denunciation. While seemingly merciful, its true purpose was to cast a wide net, sowing seeds of suspicion and fear among neighbors and even within families. Following these edicts, denunciations poured in. No direct evidence was truly needed. Rumor, personal vendetta, or even a casual remark could trigger an investigation. The accused, more often than not a converso or morisco, whose loyalty was already under scrutiny, would be arrested without warning, often in the dead of night. Their property was immediately confiscated, their families left destitute. They simply vanished into the system. Their disappearance, a stark warning to the community, life within an Inquisition prison was a psychological torment. Cells were often solitary, dark and cold, designed to break the spirit. The accused was held in secret, denied contact with the outside world, and most crucially, never informed of the specific charges against them, nor the identity of their accusers. This profound secrecy was a cornerstone of the Inquisition's power. Without knowing what they were accused of or by whom, how could one mount a defense? The goal was not to find innocence, but to extract a confession. The interrogations were relentless, often stretching over months or even years. The inquisitors, learned men of stern demeanor, would patiently, persistently question the accused, dissecting their words, looking for inconsistencies, contradictions, or any sign of deviation from orthodox faith. They believed they were guiding a lost soul back to salvation, and a confession was paramount for this spiritual healing. If confessions were not readily forthcoming, the Inquisition resorted to torture. While often described as a tool of last resort and strictly regulated, not intended to cause permanent injury or death, and confessions made under torture had to be ratified later, its psychological and physical impact was devastating. Methods such as the strappado, suspension by the wrists, often with weights, the garrucha, the rack, or the toca, water torture, forcing water down the throat, were employed to break the will. The accused, weakened by hunger, fear, and sleep deprivation, often confessed to whatever was required to end the agony. These confessions, however obtained, were considered proof of heresy. The accused was allowed a defense lawyer, but this lawyer's primary duty was not to protect the client, but to persuade them to confess for the good of their soul. Witnesses brought forward by the accused were often themselves investigated for heresy. The entire system was designed to be self-perpetuating, with every step pushing the accused towards an inevitable confession and often a public punishment. For those caught within its gears, the Spanish Inquisition was not merely a court. It was a silent, terrifying machine that ground down human spirit and freedom, leaving behind a pervasive, chilling shadow of fear. The ultimate public manifestation of the Inquisition's power, and perhaps its most terrifying spectacle, was the auto de fe, act of faith. Far from a spontaneous burning, it was a meticulously orchestrated public ceremony, designed not just to punish, but to instill profound fear and absolute conformity in the populace. These were not secret executions. They were grand, chilling, theatrical productions of spiritual purification and state authority. Preparation for an auto de fe could take months. Once verdicts were reached, a date was set, often coinciding with a major religious festival to ensure maximum attendance. Invitations were sent out, Dignitaries, nobles, and even the royal family often attended, lending their presence to the solemn occasion. A massive scaffold or stage would be erected in the town's main square, adorned with religious symbols and the banners of the Inquisition. This was not a place of execution, but a platform for judgment and public penance. On the appointed day, the condemned were led in a somber procession. They wore distinctive garments: the San Benito, a yellow tunic marked with crosses, flames, or devils, indicating their sentence. Those destined for the stake wore carrozas, tall conical hats. Each step of the procession was slow, deliberate, a public display of humiliation and the Inquisition's triumph. Crowds, sometimes tens of thousands strong, lined the streets, a mixture of awe, horror, and morbid fascination etched on their faces. Many believed they were witnessing an act of divine justice, purifying the community of sin. Once on the scaffold, the sentences were read aloud, often in excruciating detail, recounting the alleged heresies and the evidence, or confessions, used to convict. For many, this public reading was itself a crushing punishment, destroying their reputation and that of their family for generations. The punishments varied. Many received lesser penalties: public flogging, forced pilgrimage, heavy fines, or prolonged imprisonment.
These penitents, having reconciled with the Church, were often spared death, but bore the mark of the San Benito for life, a permanent badge of shame.
But for those deemed impenitent or relapsed heretics, those who refused to confess, or who confessed but later recanted, or who had been tried before, the ultimate fate awaited. They were relaxed to the secular arm, a grim euphemism meaning they were handed over to civil authorities for execution. The Inquisition, in its twisted logic, claimed it did not shed blood, yet it was the Inquisition that had rendered the judgment, knowing full well what would follow. The pyre awaited. Outside the city walls, piles of faggots and wood had been prepared. The condemned, often gagged to prevent them from speaking heresy in their final moments, were tied to the stake. The flames, once lit, consumed not only their bodies, but also served as a stark, unforgettable warning. The auto da fe was a meticulously crafted psychological weapon, a terrifying sermon in fire and ash, designed to extinguish not just individual lives, but any spark of dissent or unorthodoxy in the hearts of the Spanish people. Its shadow loomed large over generations, a chilling testament to the power of fear. As the 16th century dawned, the initial fervor against conversos and moriscos began to wane, largely due to the success of the Inquisition itself. Many genuinely converted, others fled, and those who persisted in secret practices became increasingly adept at concealment. But a powerful institution, once established, rarely dismantles itself. Instead, the Spanish Inquisition found new threats to the purity of faith, broadening its terrifying scope. One such new enemy was Protestantism. As the Reformation swept across Europe, Spain, a bastion of Catholicism, became vigilant against any perceived infiltration of Lutheran or Calvinist ideas. While Protestantism never gained a significant foothold in Spain due to the Inquisition's ruthless efficiency, those few who embraced it, often foreigners or Spanish intellectuals who had traveled abroad, faced particularly brutal suppression. They were considered dangerous innovators, undermining the very foundation of the Church. The Inquisition also turned its gaze towards less tangible threats, such as witchcraft and sorcery. Unlike the continent-wide witch hunts that ravaged parts of Europe, the Spanish Inquisition's approach to witchcraft was often more cautious and less prone to mass hysteria. They generally viewed accused witches as deluded rather than truly in league with the devil, often favoring penance and re-education over immediate execution. However, this did not mean their victims escaped suffering. Interrogations were still brutal, and the fear of accusation remained potent. Other groups also fell under scrutiny, including Freemasons, proponents of Enlightenment ideas, and even those accused of blasphemy or bigamy. The long arm of the Inquisition wasn't confined to the Iberian Peninsula. As Spain built its vast colonial empire, the Holy Office established tribunals in the New World, in cities like Lima, Peru, Mexico City, and Cartagena de Indias. Here, the Inquisition focused primarily on maintaining the orthodoxy of the European colonizers and conversos who had emigrated, rather than on the indigenous populations who were largely seen as new converts still learning the faith. However, native religious practices deemed idolatry or witchcraft could still bring indigenous people under its harsh judgment. By the 18th century, with the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and individual rights gaining traction across Europe, the intense zeal of the Inquisition began to wane. Its methods seemed increasingly anachronistic and barbaric to a more enlightened mind. Its political influence also diminished as Bourbon monarchs sought to centralize power in the crown, while it continued to function, imposing fines, imprisoning individuals, and occasionally staging smaller auto-da-fés. The widespread terror of its earlier centuries slowly receded. However, its presence, though less overt, still cast a long shadow, a reminder of the power wielded by the combined forces of church and state to enforce conformity and suppress any whisper of dissent. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the chilling grip of the Spanish Inquisition, while still present, began to weaken. The intellectual currents of the Enlightenment swept across Europe, championing reason, individual liberty, and religious tolerance. These ideas, though often suppressed in Spain, slowly eroded the foundations of an institution built on dogma and fear. The very notion of punishing thought became increasingly anachronistic in an age that celebrated scientific discovery and philosophical inquiry. The Bourbon monarchs of the 18th century, influenced by Enlightenment absolutism, also sought to centralize power, often clashing with the Inquisition's independent authority. They limited its reach, particularly over political matters, and gradually reduced its role in public life. The grand, terrifying auto-da-fés became rarer, replaced by more subdued, private ceremonies. The sheer scale of executions also diminished significantly from its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries. The true death knell for the Inquisition came with the Napoleonic Wars and the French occupation of Spain in the early 19th century. Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother and King of Spain, officially abolished the Inquisition in 1808, viewing it as an archaic and oppressive institution. This abolition, though enforced by a foreign power, reflected a growing sentiment among liberal Spaniards who had been inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution. However, the shadow of the Inquisition was long. With the restoration of the Spanish monarchy under Ferdinand VII in 1814, the Inquisition was briefly reinstated. The conservatives, who saw it as a bulwark against liberalism and revolution, celebrated its return. Yet its power was diminished, its methods increasingly unpopular, and its very existence a symbol of a past that many wished to leave behind. It was finally definitively abolished in 1834 by a royal decree issued by Queen Isabella II's regency amidst a new wave of liberal reforms. After over 350 years, the Tribunal of the Holy Office, which had shaped the very soul of Spain, was no more. The legacy of the Spanish Inquisition is complex and continues to be debated. For its victims, it left an indelible mark of suffering, fear, and shattered lives. For Spain, it created a society deeply suspicious of dissent, prioritizing religious conformity above all else, which some historians argue stifled intellectual and scientific progress. Yet it also contributed to the formation of a unified Spanish identity rooted in fervent Catholicism.
Today, the Inquisition stands as a stark historical warning, a chilling example of how religious zeal, coupled with unchecked state power, can lead to systematic oppression and profound human tragedy. Its story reminds us of the fragility of individual liberties and the enduring human struggle against intolerance and the fear of the other. Its shadow may have lifted, but its lessons remain, etched into the collective memory of humanity.